All righty. Well, please, Ray, take us away for another guest session.
Well, I don't know if everybody had the chance to see the video I posted of Serge in the High Vibe Thursday group, but that he pretty much explained what his journey was to getting to this point, and now he's getting ready to gift us with a session, and I know we're all very grateful.
Yeah, I've been doing this for a long time since I started in, I think in June or summer of 1982.
Mhm,
Wow.
Yep, it's a long time.
mhm.
I've hung out for about half of that.
God, I haven't seen you for a long time, Chuck.
It has been a
You got
while.
the little mustache
Yeah,
and
right.
goatee thing going on.
Yes, it's a
And
little
I think
different.
you have a little more gray than I
I may,
remember.
I may,
Actually,
yeah.
a lot more.
Uh-huh.
But then so do I. So
Right. Yeah, I'm just trying to keep up.
So, Serge, I mean, how would you like to do this? Is Kris going to have a message for us, or
well, he loves to interact with people, so he'll, you know, pop in and just kind of have fun with you guys.
we'll take our cue from him then?
You know what I
Yeah,
think of?
and
You know
go
what I
ahead,
think a
Chuck.
fun story is, Serge? I don't know if you mentioned it in the recordings, but the I don't remember if it was Christine, the librarian, or what it
Yeah.
was. Did you mention that?
So no, but
It's fun.
I had been when I was about 14 years old, I was already fluent and read everything that was published about Edgar Casey, and I knew then that's what I want to do. I didn't realize what that implied, but I knew I wanted to do something like that. And so back in maybe 81 or so, I somebody gave me the name of a lady in Columbus, Ohio, who was doing some channeling, and so I wrote to her, and it took a little while to get a reply. But the reply was like a 10 to 12 page questionnaire. Did I believe in Jesus? Blah blah blah. So from my point of view, it was file 13 right away. And then later on, I was given the name of a lady in a place called Picton, Ontario, which is about 3 hours east of Toronto. And she was a psychic, and she was actually very good. She was able to talk to me about things I had never spoken to another human being about. And her and her husband had then invited my friend and I to come back after we went out for dinner to come back because one of their friends was going to be doing his very first Edgar Casey style channeling, which is sleeping trance. And his name was Rick Thurston. He's passed away now. And what was curious is that
Was he part
as
of
he
the
was,
ARE Institute, Rick?
no,
I was a
not that I
huge
know of.
Edgar Casey fan.
Yeah, well, so was I,
The
but
name's very familiar to me, Thurston.
yeah, I don't know that much about the rest of his life. I do know that while he was being inducted into a deep state, I recognized that something was happening in me too. I was also experiencing dissociation. And so they had the session, and the guy who trained him, he's also passed away. They were offering a workshop and a few weekends from then, a workshop to help develop those same skills, and I participated. And I tried for maybe a month, almost every day, and it just didn't seem to stick. And my friend says, why don't we just give it one more shot? And if it really doesn't work, we'll just take a break. So we did that, and he started the induction process. And all of a sudden, I vaguely hear somebody else talking in the room, and I'm thinking, who is this person? Well, how did they get in here? And then I realized, oh my God, it's coming from my mouth. That was another voice. My friend picked it up anyway. So we worked until we could get that state settled in for about an hour. And sometime after that, Um, of course, I would always visit a particular metaphysical bookstore in Ottawa. And sometime after that, I had a dream that was very strange to me. It was more than a dream. And I walked into this mansion and looking around in some of the big rooms, and there was a room with a big um, piano, but not a player piano. What's the big other kind of piano?
Grand,
Hmm?
grand.
Yes, yes, a grand piano, not a baby, a grand piano. And there was a lady sitting at the bench, and she sort of motioned, invited me to sit beside her, and she had these cards, and they were called destiny cards, but they were big. They were at least a foot and a half by maybe 10 inches wide, like tarot cards, but really big. And they were called destiny cards, and she was reading them to me. And I don't know what was talked about, but I do know feeling a bit overwhelmed. So I sort of just stepped out of the room to kind of clear my head and absorb what was being talked about. And then I tried to go back and I couldn't find her anywhere. It's as if she disappeared. And I remember in the dream, I walked by a waiter down the hallway, very stereotypical white gloves, coat and tails, holding a tray in his hand. And I asked him where this lady was. And he looked at me and he said, "Why?" I said, "Well, I was just talking to her." And he turned as white as a sheet and he says, "But she's been dead for years. I was talking to a ghost." And for me, the name was Christine. She was very grandmotherly with the kind of bun at the back, just like a librarian with the grandma arms. And then the dreams evolved a little bit until all of a sudden the gender changed and it was more male. And I decided, well, I guess the name is Kris then. And I was spelling it Chris. And later on, when I started having little groups of people, somebody happened to say, "Oh, it sounds so much like our Lord Jesus Christ." I said, "Okay, that's my cue to change the spelling. It's going to be Kris. You're not going to stick that or pin that on me." And so that's what I call him. That's what I call the energy. uh, Kris, Kris. So that's kind of where that fits in. So that's a long time ago, and I still remember that.
Wow. Yeah, I was like you. I was absolutely a huge Edgar Casey fan for many, many years. It turned out my when I was 12, just before I turned 13, mom gave me an Edgar Casey book,
Wow.
Gina Sermonara, Many Mansions.
Yeah, I remember that book.
And yeah, I loved it. And I read it over and over again.
Hmm.
But my parents were not only not religious, they were fervent, passionate, anti-religious people,
Hmm.
and told us every week that religion was responsible for every bad thing in the world. But that Edgar Casey book changed me. I started to say, well, if this is the good, if the good coming out of Edgar Casey is any indication, then and it really expanded my world. And it turned out that my grandparents lived about a block away from the ARE Institute
Oh,
in
wow.
Virginia, and I had been
It's like you
playing.
got the jackpot.
I did, and then I would go down there and take dream courses. I started dreams very early, and yeah, it was yeah, I must have given away I had a big Edgar Casey library. I gave away about 200 of the books.
Wow. I had precognitive dreams by the time I was about 12 years old. In
Wow.
fact, by the time I was about 6, I had one that I remember. And how I got to be interested in Edgar Casey is that um, growing up in an abusive family, my stepdad was terrible abusive alcoholic, I would spend a lot of time at the local library. And I came across a book one day. It was called Youth, Yoga, and Reincarnation by Jess Stearns.
Oh, yeah, I love that. What a classic.
And in there, he talks about Edgar Casey. So I quickly go through the library and find out all sorts of books. And later on was about maybe 14, 15, there was a whole new slew of books come out about Edgar Casey. And I read all of those as much as I could. It was really something for me. And actually, by the time I was about 9, we moved from Montreal to Ottawa when I was about 8. And about, I would say, maybe within a year or so. I remember one morning at the corner waiting for the light to change so I could cross the road and go to school about 10 minutes away. And I was the only kid on the corner, and there was maybe 3 or 4 adults there. And I'm just minding my business. I'm a kid, and all of a sudden, there's a stream of thoughts that flows into my awareness, and I caught it, and it had questions. And basically, it went along the lines of, I wonder what makes these people think the things they do and do the things they do. And that's actually been my motivator my entire life. And I also remember saying, no, I'm too young for that. To give me a break. Back off. But
Yeah.
it was deceit. It was, I got it. And that's what I've been kind of, helping explore that whole time. So it's been a very interesting journey.
It's nice how the religion actually played a small role in the naming of your entity.
Mm. Sort of, yeah.
They did a Search for God books from Edgar Casey, and I managed to get in a group, and of 5, sometimes 6 other ladies, and we went on for a couple decades doing those books every week. They were just wonderful.
Later on, by the way, too, I also came across another book, and unfortunately, right at the moment, I can't remember the guy's name, but he was hailed as the new Edgar Casey, and he lived in Gull Point, Michigan. And I wrote to him, and I was expressing my interest, and he was willing to mentor me. I just had to go down there, but I was too young to do that. So I had to decline. Um, and
Wow.
yeah. Um, and there was something else too. I'm full of those things. All sorts of coincidences. My whole life has been part of my experience. Yeah. And I have a interesting, I guess, kind of relationship with Kris. Um, and we sort of came to an understanding along those lines that I'm allowed to make my own mistakes. And he will never say, I told you so, or don't do that. Okay, fine, go ahead. But if I need assistance, then I get it. Which to me, it's a very respectful boundary. Um, it's just like a child, if you try to prevent it from scraping its knees when it's trying to walk, it'll never walk. So I have a deep appreciation for that kind of energy. There's never any blame assigned or anything.
Sounds like unconditional love.
Yeah, pretty well. He's far better at it than I am.
That's why we're here, though, Serge. Come on. We're trying to get to that, right?
Oh, so you guys ready?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I kind of felt them hovering around about 3 minutes ago.
And that's, yeah, just about 3 to 5 minutes ago, I just
Yeah.
kind of felt the stream come in.
Yeah, his energy is still recognizable to me.
Now we trust that you are all comfortable,
Yeah.
and we thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much for yours as well.
And as Joseph has expressed, it is nice to lay non-physical eyes on you once again.
You again as well, my friend.
And it is also nice to see new faces and new energies, and that makes it very interesting, and an interesting mix with an interesting preamble. The number of people who have experiences that are similar to yours in one way or another far outstrips the number of people who do not have such similar experiences. But as you grow older, you move away from that because you become accustomed to the ways of the world, to rely solely on the physical senses and what they feed you, the feedback from your physical senses, giving you a picture of consensus reality and not much else, until you begin to have a desire to explore those other hidden dimensions. And they are hidden only because you have hidden them, of the human experience, because the human experience goes hand in hand with what you refer to as the spiritual experience. They are actually the two sides of a coin, and they are worth exploring because it can lead you to recognize that there is an entire reality just beyond the range of your own sensory peripheral observations. And there lies the secret to your peace of mind, because you easily get caught up in the events and conditions and circumstances of consensus reality or physical life. And it is easy to forget your center, to forget what grounds you, basically to forget your authenticity, your authentic self. And very often you need to make some small corrections. We have utilized this example very often. If you fly a plane from New York City, say to Paris, the plane never flies in a straight line. It always makes small corrections along the way so it arrives at its destination. There are other factors such as wind and altitude and rotation of the earth and so on that require those minor adjustments along the way. In a similar fashion, your own journey as a human and spiritual entity, you are exploring a very unique dimension of being where your, we will just call it your energy, meets another kind of your energy, that is your human physical body, flesh and blood. And you have to contend with its unique experiences and dimensions while also seeking your center or your ground of being. So you have then a unique perspective on what you are capable of, what you can create. And by that we mean far more than just trying to create a parking space. By that we mean that you create everything, including the rooms each of you are in, including the body within which you have this experience, including the city that you live in, and the country, and the planet, and the firmament or the heavens within which you have your cosmos and cosmic experience. This is all done from one place, and only one place, in here, in your mind. And the sooner you recognize it, the entirety of your experience is completely internal and everything is projected externally, that gives you a decided advantage. First of all, in recognizing that you cannot be the victim of outside events or conditions because you created them. They stem from the flow of your feelings and emotions. And that stems from an internal language, a psychic and psychological language that interprets itself through emotions and feeling tones, which then is translated into your daily physical experience. So in some way, you are all translators of energy. And the sooner you recognize that, the easier your own journey is. The more delightful it is, because you can recognize that if there's an experience you do not like or do not care to have, you don't have to be stuck there. Because in some ways, recognizing that you have something you do not want is a form of angst or suffering, as well as not having something that you want is similar, the other end of that situation or spectrum. So by recognizing that you are the creators of your experience, you can do away with a lot of your own struggles. And instead of struggling, you can enjoy the powers and abilities that you have to create your moment. Does that make sense?
Very much so.
Yes.
So the whole point is everything is the result of your mindset. And the reason it is important to recognize such things as mindfulness, your thinking patterns, and so on, is that you have a choice. You can be master of your mind, or your mind can be your master. And about 2 years ago, Joseph went on and by the way, Joseph is whom we speak through, went on a little journey, and he started to almost, how do we say, with a great appetite, study philosophy from the ancient Greeks and on, even prior, and through almost all cultures, religions, spiritual practices. And something dawned on him. And it is that all of these teachings have as a central theme self-mastery. Not control, not to suppress, but to recognize self, its energies, and determine what you want and not go for what you do not want. So that makes a very big difference in your lives to come to that observation and to conclude that you have the ability to alter or change your mindset, thus your outward physical reality. The outward physical reality takes a little time, but your inner reality takes no time because it doesn't depend on time. That is what the ego does. And by ego, we do not mean something malignant, something that seeks to strip you of your spirituality, but something that can help you understand what it is that you are creating at the physical end. Does that also make sense to you?
Yes.
So moments ago, we spoke about feelings and emotions as a type of language, and it has many dialects in your reality. It has the dialects of education, it has commerce, it has so many different dialects. They all communicate certain aspects of your own greater emotional and feeling tone well-being. And of course, the point is not to get it all streamlined and create a nice, happy little camp, but to go full steam ahead and live that life. You are not really supposed to live in a bubble. You are meant to dive into the ocean of existence, to swim to your heart's content, to dive as deep as you want, to relish the beauty of your creations, and to indulge in the experience of being. We are aware that there are some people who think that being spiritual means that you are always praying and meditating. That is fine for a while, but do not forget that all your prayers, all your meditations, and all internal work has somehow or other to manifest itself. And thus, feel free to dive into the ocean of living, deep diving. Go into your own psychological Mariana Trench and just explore life. Does that make sense to you?
Yes.
Yes.
When you look at the heavens, especially in the night, you see the moon, you see the stars, you may see parts of the Milky Way if there is not too much light pollution in your area. And when you look deep into that kind of a space, you are looking deep with your physical eyes into the depths of your own being. When you look into that kind of a depth of the heavens, you often recognize something that is awe-inspiring, that makes you feel as if somehow or other you are part of this beautiful scenario. And you are right. You are correct. Especially since it mirrors the deepest parts of your being. You know that space per se does not exist. And at the same time, there is nothing but space. So it is a bit of a conundrum. But do know that you are infinite beings. You have infinite energy at your disposal. And the best, how do we say, the best throughway, in fact, almost highway to the depths of that infinite being is through what you refer to as your subconscious mind. Just ask before you take rest tonight. Whether you remember your dreams or not is not necessarily the point, but ask your inner being or your subconscious self to help you perhaps clear an issue that you are dealing with, to bring some understanding to a part of your life, or simply to help you feel connected. And you may wake up quite surprised at what you feel. And if you do have that kind of an awakening in the morning, try not to rush through to the computer and to your Facebook and to your coffee. Just give it a few moments and linger, absorb, lay still, and let the feeling flow deep into your being. And it has a very beneficial and healing effect. And extremely simple. Just ask before going to sleep. Do you follow?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a nice lesson.
The nature of your mind is such that You respond to life through suggestions. You have ideas, that is a suggestion. You have feelings, that is a suggestion. You have emotions, that is a suggestion. Explore your inner realm in that way. And do not be feared. You can develop a nice bridge and relationship with your inner self or subconscious, and it is there to assist you. Your mind, once it starts catching on to the idea that you actually want to work with it and not against it, it becomes your friend. The same thing happens with your ego. But if you mistrust the ego that somehow or other it will lead you astray, then that is what you will find. Hmm? Do you understand that principle? Because you always get, as Uncle Seth has referred to many times, you always get what you concentrate on. So if you concentrate on the nurturing nature that is deep within you, this is what you will begin to experience. And it is sweet, it is loving. Now, if you will allow, we don't necessarily want to hog the entire discussion. We look forward. If you have any inquiries or observations, please feel free.
Thank you, Kris. I'm going to lead off the questions, and I have to ask, just because I like miracles and I have to do my due diligence, can you please fill us in on the election and any fraud or anything else that might have come from that, and any details that you might be able to share, if so?
We are surprised that you did not jump in earlier with that. Now, initially, we had suggested to a few people, and it is also on the YouTube video that will appear shortly, that there was a high probability that you would have a Madam President in the White House. The optimism was there. There were other issues, however, that could not necessarily come to that point. Because if we had instead given you what is coming, you would have most likely rejected it. The election itself showed you, for one thing, that some people consider democracy itself to be a danger to the people. It is not true, of course, but the more you can lie with pure bravado, the more you are convincing. So the point of that is that democracy, whether it is the US brand or the ancient Greek brand, is fairly new. Democracy has only been around for perhaps 25 to 2,800 years. So it is still untested because for thousands upon thousands of years, you had autocracy, you had monarchy, you had a king, you had a single ruler, and therefore everybody lined up. Now, all of a sudden, the Greeks decided to open that up, and the common man could have a voice in who sets out the laws and the rule of the day. And it has worked in some capacity, has not worked in others, but it is an experiment. So now you have someone there who has convinced a large portion of Americans that the threat to human life in the United States is democracy itself. Of course, it will be quite surprising when they awaken to their own situation once everything is set into motion. And it will not necessarily be pretty. But that will not necessarily last a long time. There will be uprisings, there will be changes, and as a result, the transformation of society will be fundamental, and it will be foundational for a whole new experiment in democracy by putting into context what has occurred. Several things have occurred here. You have had unprecedented Russian and other nations' interference behind the scenes. Why do you think he and the other have been in contact with Moscow, with Putin? It was not to discuss what was for lunch, certainly, though that might have been part of the discussion. But certain things are changing for your, what shall we call it? Joseph made a reference. The American dream, as you know it, might now have passed away. So it will have implications. The point is that this too is an experiment. It will be difficult for you to see that people you thought would have supported certain parts of American life are quite willing to toss it just to have a certain sense, and it is a sense of security. Not true security, but giving a sense of security, such as mass deportations, closing borders, and so on and so forth, as if somehow or other you will be protected. But you will not be protected from what is within the border. Does that point come home?
Yes, it does. Can you shed some light on any possible timeline?
You know, and maybe before you go down that road, what hits me as you're saying that, Kris, is that, of course, those reflections have to be the reflections that are going on within each individual that still struggles with their own ability.
Yes. So basically, the psychic struggles with individuals, on the one hand, they want to recognize that their lives are meaningful, that their lives have value, that they are authentic, and at the same time, there is still an inner struggle with their own shadow self, where they have been convinced that perhaps their life has no meaning, that perhaps they are not valued. So it represents a very deep schism within the psyche. And on the one hand, it could be frightening, but at the other hand, it also represents the beginnings of a malady that is coming up to the surface. Just like when you have a boil, it may appear as a tiny little pimple, and it grows, it is painful, it has to be excised, and then it begins to heal. So it is a bit of a harsh reality to understand. And yes, you will go through some very interesting times. It is said that there is an ancient Chinese curse: may you live in interesting times. You are there now. And no, the Chinese have not cursed you. You have done that yourselves. But you will also grow in a way that you may not be able to understand now. But those who are, such as yourselves, a little more on the inside, so to speak, are able to tap into their own inner resources, may recognize a greater affinity for their intuitiveness, to appreciate the inner freedom that you have. And yes, you may sometimes balk when you see what will happen. But do not let that affect you. Instead, always consider optimism as a superior force, though it may not show that initially. But always consider that optimism is a superior force. Does that make sense to you?
Yes.
That's my game plan.
Indeed. The power of optimism exists because you recognize a deeper underlying reality that keeps propelling you to your own inner nature. So even though things may appear chaotic, having an understanding that you can create your own reality, not the reality of other people, but your own reality, such as staying steadfastly anchored, is very powerful. In fact, far more empowering. But you have to give it that meaning. We have always referred to you as the makers of meaning. So you make the meaning in your life. Does that make sense to you?
Yep, that was a very profound answer. Thank you very much, Kris.
Indeed. May you have another inquiry or perhaps observation.
Liz?
I do have a question. So I think we touched on the wanted or unwanted things that we observe or things that we want to see. So if, for example, we have or we observe 100 unwanted things, but we focus on one beautiful thing, as simple as a beautiful flower or amazing time like spend with your pet, will that help soften the edges of the other
For
unwanted things?
yourself. For yourself. So, as
Or
we
for other
suggested
people?
earlier, your mind functions on the principle of suggestibility. So, in other words, you are always in an altered or trance state. Whether you recognize it or not, you are always in an altered state. So, for instance, you're taking a walk, and out of the corner of your eye, you see a beautiful little flower, and that captures your attention for a moment, and it changes your mood. You may be walking further along the line, and oh, there is a little bird on the fence. That also captures your attention. So, this is a beautiful type of constant reminder that you are always in a trance state. And the more you see things like that, guess what? The more you will see them. So, basically, if you find, and this is where self mastery comes in, if you find that your mind tends to wander onto unwanted things, bring it back. You have that power. We suggested earlier that angst or even some form of suffering exists between recognizing what you don't have and what you don't want. There are two different things. In the middle is you. So you determine where your mind is going to go. Self mastery. Self mastery doesn't mean you're going to squash or fight your emotions or feeling tones. It means that you have them, you acknowledge them, even if it is, as Bolero knows, even if you have a few moments of angst, you know you're not going to live there. You don't move there. Express it, move on. That way, there's no need to deny anything because spirituality is not about a goody two shoes attitude. It is about the reality of your presence. And by presence, we would spell that with a capital P. Does that also make sense to you?
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you.
If you remind yourself constantly that you and your inner self has your best interest at heart, the entirety of your universe, or should we say YOU verse, has your interest at heart. And thus you will see it. You create the events, conditions, and circumstances. You are not at the mercy of them. If an event, condition, or circumstance seems to rub you the wrong way, acknowledge right away, oh, why am I doing this to myself? Why am I doing this? What is going on? Oh, I get it. Let me move onto that lane, get out of that traffic jam and go in this lane and move along. You have that power. And trust us, it will move along very nicely. Does that help?
Thank you so much. Yes, it does.
As we suggested earlier, before going to sleep, ask your subconscious or inner self for assistance. When you awaken, don't rush. Just take a moment to linger at that beautiful hypnagogic state, almost as if you're floating, and set a gentle intention that today will be the best day you can create for yourself. Tomorrow is another day, and yesterday is nowhere. It doesn't exist. In fact, neither exist. But for today, you will have the best possible day. Well, you might find that your mind or even ego might try to argue with you. What are you doing? Why don't you just go back to the way things were? You say, well, not today. I am not in the mood for those games. I want that. I want peace of mind. I want to have fun. I want to enjoy life. I don't want to be bothered by the angst of something that happened 40 years ago. It doesn't exist anymore. Why are you still carrying that baggage? Does that make sense? So you can
Yes.
have a psychological baggage burning campfire. And it can be as big as you want because you create it. Imagine yourself taking all the baggage from all these years, throwing it into the fire, and make it a bonfire for the ages. And then you will see over the next few days how different you feel. To realize you have been carrying stuff around, weighing you down. For what? So you can continue beating yourself up? Be kind. Being kind is not about being kind to the other, because truthfully, there is no other. It is about being kind to you. Everybody else is there in certain ways for you to demonstrate that kindness that you give yourself. So have a kind party, a party of kindness. Let the whole of your universe show up, have sparklers and fireworks galore, and just enjoy the moment. Does that make sense to you?
Thank you. That's beautiful.
Indeed. You're most welcome. And in many ways, the words we spoke actually come from you. Now, we don't read minds, but we read a certain form of your energy. So we are just saying, pay attention to your own energy. Now, would someone else want to chip in?
You're muted, Miles.
Wow, this is really, really enjoyable. You've taken us very deep, and I absolutely love every part of it. It's wonderful. So I spent today, ironically, thinking and studying ego from a Sethian perspective. And I have some dear friends that have been following a path of non-duality. And in that path, it seems to me that they've been training themselves to ignore the ego. And if I've got
Might
that
we
wrong,
tell you a little secret?
yeah, please.
It actually requires the ego to tell yourself the ego doesn't exist.
Yeah.
In other words, too, what you might refer and what others refer as duality, non-duality, neither exist. There is no reality in that sense of the word. There is your reality. There is no external. Everything stems from within you. Your mindset creates the universe that you know.
I believe that deeply. My wife and I during our spiritual practices this morning, explored that quite extensively, because there's no limits to what you're saying.
Indeed.
There's
And
nothing that in our lives that we aren't creating.
that is correct. Not a single thing. You created every single atom and molecule that not only makes up your body, that not only makes up your thought body and your thoughts, but everything that you perceive through your senses. And everything that you perceive through your senses doesn't exist in the classical sense. You interpret energy, your own emotions, your own feeling tones, and you transform that into buildings, people, cars, cities, highways, trucks, babies, parks, dogs, cats, birds, trees. That is an interpretation. That is the language of the psyche. And it is a sophisticated language.
Yes.
It is masterful. It is the stuff of the gods. Even though there are no gods, it is still the stuff of the gods themselves.
So my question about the ego is this, that Seth doesn't give us any extensive tracks, but throughout his 40 or so volumes, he does refer to the ego. And if I just want to confirm that my interpretation of what he's saying is that the ego can be, for want of a better word, trained. In other words, we can turn the ego's focus to where we want it. So for
Yes.
instance, if I am finding myself in a state that's, say, depressing, or I want the ego as my ally to bring that to my attention, because I may not be aware that I've slid into that state, so
Correct.
that I can
You
make
could
the
say,
ego my
for
ally.
instance, you can, for instance, consider in a form of analogy that the ego is like a magnifying glass. It brings into concentration what is actually going on at deeper layers of your awareness. Now, the ego is never malignant. It is never something that will deprive you of spirituality. It is part of your psychic and spiritual makeup because it is that lens, if you want to, a frame of reference through which you observe what you are doing, how you are doing it, and why you are doing it. As such, the classic term of ego is actually always your friend. But if you consider the ego to be your enemy, then it must act according to what you decide. So if you decide that somehow or other the ego may be your spiritual enemy, the poor thing has to comply in a way. Do you follow?
Shocked. I'm very shocked, because I have done exactly that.
You could say
So
right now that you took the words out of your own mouth.
thank you.
If you
Thank you.
consider that the ego is a part of your awareness that is meant to help you understand how you create, then so be it. The ego itself transforms and it identifies with other aspects or focus selves as you go through your numerous experiences in other probabilities. But you are always yourself. And that is a very precious gift that you have given yourself to experience life as you. In that sense, there is no other you quite as you. And as we have suggested in one of our recent groups, how many yous have you been since you've been you?
Infinite.
Yes, you have been many different yous, and they are all very interesting in certain ways. They run the full spectrum of human experience. And there is no judgment implied. In one life, you could be a very, how should we say, contentious individual, and in another, you could be a very abiding individual. As some people are wont to say, you might be a saint in the streets and a sinner in the sheets. And yet, both ends of that spectrum are completely spiritual and non judgmental. Depends on how you interpret it. You make the meaning of your life. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with being a saint in the streets and a sinner in the sheets. By all means, indulge. That is what life is about. It is not about being sanctimonious. Does that make some sense to you?
Uh, it's been very enlightening and enormously helpful, and I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Indeed. Now, we are open to other inquiries or observations. If you like, please feel free.
Well, if no one else has stepped up, so I'm going to ask another one if you don't mind, Kris.
We do not mind, as long as you do not mind.
My curiosity has been piqued because I tend to want to know information that I'm not always supposed to know at this particular time in the timeline. Can you expand on the ancient energy of Ut Solo?
As we suggested before, a few moments back, this is your universe. So you may hear different names, different things, different this and that, but they all represent various aspects or focuses or energies as they are translated in other terms. So you might very easily, for instance, have had a life where you were a pharaoh in Egypt, or another life where you were a pauper in 17th century England, in London, like Charles Dickens' character. You definitely could have been everything in between. So these will leave certain impressions. They are like footprints in the snow. Some last longer, some disappear if the sun rises and melts the snow. But all of these footprints carry a portion of your energy. So the name that you mentioned actually represents a portion of energy to you, not to anyone else. The meaning you ascribe to it is uniquely your own. The point of that is it is not about an external source of energy. There is no external source of energy that is only perceived through your senses. Everything is internal. In other words, the entirety of experience is an inside job. Does that make some sense to you?
That makes a lot of sense. Nice analogies in there too. Thank you, Kris.
Indeed. In fact, in some ways, that name and so-called associated energies represent a portion of you that you might be getting familiar with. You might have a sense of it. You might not necessarily ever fully understand the full breadth and scope and width and height and depth of your own energy because you are physically centered right now. Once you move out of that frame and into what we refer to as dream time, you may get a better sense of the overall state of grace that exists outside the frame of the human experience.
That's a goal.
That makes sense to you?
Yes. Yeah, I've been curious ever since that the Yael Raven by Patrick Godine did our heart circle meditation, and he included the Solo ancient energy, and I felt a very powerful vibration from that, and I did with all of the other additional beings that were added. But since that's part of my heart circle now, and I'm not going to let it be broken, then I just figured I would ask and get some more information about the people in my circle or beings in my circle. Thank you.
Indeed. Keep in mind that it is something that is centered within your being. It doesn't exist outside in some far-flung galaxy that you must reach for. There's nothing there. Everything is internal. So, for instance, if you want to, say, meditate on a particular sound or vibration, try focusing on the sound so ra mi, so ra mi, and just let that vibrate on your tongue, on your palate, through your cranium and vocal cords, and send it down into your body. So ra mi,
Got it.
and see what happens then.
Thank you very much.
Indeed.
Anyone else have a question? Speak now or forever hold your Kris.
Last comment, I'm filled with gratitude and appreciation. Thank you so much.
The appreciation and gratitude is amplified at this end of the microphone. And might we say, just a little thing in parting, many people suggest that you write down your gratitude journal and your gratitude notes, which is excellent. But if you want to add an extra depth to it, as you write it out, feel it. Connect with the feeling tone of that gratitude and let it infuse your entire being as far as you know it. After a short amount of time, a few days, it might surprise you that, why didn't I do this earlier?
And Kris, I have one other question that just occurred to me, if you don't mind. When
Indeed.
we're asking our higher self and other beneficial beings to interact to and make improvements that are within our desires, is it add another layer of thanksgiving if we thank them for their help, since all
Turkey included.
now?
Turkey included. Now, just to clarify, repeat your question.
Well,
When you ask your inner self and other beings, who are the other beings? There are other aspects of your own universe. When you recognize that, you actually become an amplifier for that energy, because otherwise you are searching the cosmos for something that doesn't exist. But center it within you and you'll know that these are all parts of you. This is your energy in different manifestations. Then you have far easier access to it.
excellent. Nice lesson. Thank you.
Indeed, then we thank you and express our gratitude to all of you for lending an ear to our ramblings. And we return, Joseph, to your humble selves.
Well, as always, those ramblings have been very, very nice.
Yeah. Impressive. And thank you so much for sharing your gift.
So this is what I've got to hang out with for the past 2 decades. It's been very
Been a trip.
yeah, it's been very, very, very helpful. Very, very helpful. You know, my ability to be comfortable doing the thing that I have done recently with you guys a short time ago has in large part have to do with the movements I was able to make in association with the energy, the type of energy that Kris shares. So my good buddy, Serge, and your willingness to share that energy, I will infinitely be appreciative.
Yay.
Now, do you do this channeling regularly someplace on the internet that
Well,
I might
we have a group that meets every Monday evening at 7:30 Eastern Time. We have blocks of 8 weeks, and we take a couple of weeks off, and then we start a new topic for another 8 weeks, sometimes 10 weeks. And we've been doing that, as Chuck knows, for God knows how long.
Long time.
Yeah, decades.
And there were times where we would do sometimes 3 different threads, shall I say, in one week. We would do a Monday night, a Wednesday, and a weekend. And
Wow.
some of those workshops could be 18 weeks long. I mean, and very, very, very deep stuff. Very cool. I can't even tell you all the directions that we went, over the years. It's just been
And it's
so
what
cool.
astounds me is after 42 years, he just never shuts up. He still has stuff to talk about.
So I'm going to mention something here, and it might make you a little uncomfortable, Serge. I don't know. And guys, it might be a little bit difficult to wrap your mind around. I'm gonna preface this. So there was a time when Serge was early into this that he and Rob Butts became good friends. Correct, Serge?
Yes,
Okay. So
we were correspondents.
yeah. And so you guys are all familiar, as I am deeply, with Seth's work. And on occasion, there would be another layer of Seth that would show up. Seth 2, Seth 3 on occasion, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So there was a time, it's been many years ago now, when the energy that you just experienced expressed a very intimate connection to those other versions of Seth. I'll just put it like that.
Yeah. I think the mystics come to mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is maybe like a deeper layer of Kris. And I've always felt that when that happens, there's also a connection more strongly with Seth. And it doesn't happen very often, but every once in a while, even like Brian will suddenly recognize the energy, and others, even though it's not been talked about, it's there. It just kind of is a background as well.
And
So is this online, Serge, these meetings? And if so, can I get an address?
Yeah, I
Or,
can. There's a whole catalog of the transcripts, both in PDF format or Word format, um, on my website. And some of the more recent stuff is not up there yet.
well, what is your
And
website, Serge?
channeling, CHANNELING, Kris, KRIS.com.
Okay.
And
Channeling.
we also, yeah, channelingkris.com.
And do you have a YouTube channel and a Facebook?
Yep. Also channeling Kris.
Okay, great. And Facebook?
There is also a Facebook group. Geez, hold on. I think it's also called channelingkris.com, or channeling Kris.
Channeling
Let
Kris,
me
I think.
just, yeah, channeling Kris on Facebook.
Okay, great. Well, it sounds like a real treasure trove, and you had a huge impact and a huge help for me personally. I was really struggling with, I love my friends deeply, and I really treasure their insights and understandings. They've been an enormous help to me in understanding that I am everything on the one hand. On the other hand, this seeming battle with the ego, yeah, defending themselves and finding ways to ignore it has really, well, I loved when you said the ego's on your side, the ego. You said a lot of good things about the ego, and I'm going to make it my ally. And when I was thinking bad things about the ego, I managed to find some quotes in Seth that said, the ego's a tyrant and it's out of control. And recently today, I found a lot of quotes in Seth that were talking about how it could work with you and how it will work with you. And then you confirmed that tonight. So I guess I'm doing a great job creating my reality and expanding it in positive ways. So thank you.
Giving yourself those
From
nice choices.
yeah,
Thank
and from what I gather from Kris, um, I just lost the thread. Something that you just mentioned, but we always create, uh, and in our favor, but sometimes we don't think so.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, yeah, we have to get with our own program.
Yeah. What I noticed is we don't think so when we make it outside of ourselves,
Yeah.
either a
Yeah, pretty well.
person or a country or a war or whatever it might be. And as my wife and I were speaking this morning, I was going, there's no war out there. That's something that we're creating. It's based on our limiting beliefs. And so this is a real wonderful opportunity for us. And those comments about the election, wow. Well, we were hypothesizing this morning, based on some comments Bashar made, that maybe in fact it was for, well, you might say for the good of the population, but that wouldn't be true, would it? There is no population out there of people that are official line of consciousness. All that exists out there is my beliefs about people that I would classify as official line of consciousness and blah, blah, blah. So,
And I understand too that we still live in our physical world. Um, Somewhere around 12 to 14 years ago, maybe a bit more actually, um, there used to be an organization in Canada called Katimavik, and it brought teenagers from all over the world into different, or all over the country into camps at different parts of the country where they would learn life skills. And it was a wonderful program. A conservative government killed it. But this one group that was maybe an hour and a half or so outside of Toronto, the group leader contacted me. He wanted to, because he had read some stuff and he wanted to introduce his little group to me and to Kris. And so they came over, and the uh, the group leader, he was a little bit cocky. He said, I believe so firmly that I can go out in the street and I'll step in front of a bus and nothing will happen. And everybody balked at that and rolled their eyes. It's like, yeah, try it, buddy, and see what happens. Well, what was interesting is Kris introduced them to EFT, emotional freedom technique.
we use it every morning.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing. And now there was one young fellow there. He was a tall, lanky redhead, and he was from the east coast of Canada. And at the time, I had a cat, a long-haired Maine Coon. You know how big those are.
Yeah, huge.
And he tried to come into the living room where we all were, and one of the other boys shoot him away. And he explained that, you know, this guy is so alert, so phobic of cats. He can see one across the street and he'll just go catatonic. So he never saw the cat. So we did some tapping together with him on the issue of cats and his phobia. Then we left it at that. And then they decided they need to go home. It's like an hour and a half, 2 hour drive. It was wintertime. And they were all hanging out in the hallway and had the living room and then a hallway and then a bedroom, kitchen, bathroom, and another room at the back. And they were between the bedroom and the kitchen getting dressed. And the cat came out of the big bedroom, walked right in front of him, went into the kitchen. He saw the cat. And then some of his friends looked at me and said, what the fuck just happened?
Yeah.
He did not react as if the cat wasn't even there. And they were flabbergasted. They couldn't understand what the heck just happened. That's how amazing EFT can be. It completely
Yes.
neutralized his phobias, his beliefs about that. just boom, gone.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, we find it very powerful. I hated that, by the way. It seemed like voodoo to me, and it really pissed me off that it worked. And it just kept working. And so today I love it. But in the beginning, I despised that it worked. But it is wonderful. And
Yep.
we've added a couple touches. Of course, I completely and totally love and accept myself exactly the way I am right now. We say at the beginning and the end, which seemed to me in itself so powerful that I almost questioned if we needed EFT besides that. But
It's a
now
good
we've added
reminder.
something, excuse me?
It's a good reminder.
Yeah. But now we've added something beginner's mind, open to a miracle, non-attachment, don't know, and surrender. And that puts us in a good a good frame of mind to open up and allow the wonderful results that we can get from EFT.
Mm, yep. It can actually be life-changing.
Oh yeah.
We did, I don't know if you must have been there, Chuck, when we did the workshop in Toronto where Emmy was. Dan came as well at the hotel.
Yeah.
And there was a lady
Oh,
there.
yes.
Kris was
Sure.
talking about EFT and stuff like that and asked for a volunteer. And this lady volunteered. She didn't say too much about what her situation was. She did the tapping. The next morning, she had something to say about it. And she said she has a 13-year-old daughter who was a cutter and had attempted suicide in the past. And she suddenly realized her daughter's behavior was the same pattern that would have led her to make another attempt. She used EFT on her, and within the hour, her daughter was in the kitchen baking cakes for the family, which she had never done. So immediately, the other members of the family lined up to get EFT with it too. They couldn't believe the transformation that happened.
Nice.
Yeah, that was a pretty interesting
But
comment.
you reinvigorated me. I'm going, wow, maybe I'm not using it for enough stuff. I am using it.
Yeah, it's quite interesting.
And I'm never surprised when people say, especially if they're authentic about, some interacting with Seth on some level, because he's got his invisible fingers in just about everything, since this is one of his realities, right? I mean, he talked about that he existed before, and we existed before the earth existed, or,
Yeah, we were before we were before we were.
it's not
What
exactly
kind of verb works for that?
Yeah.
Have
the
to
way.
invent a whole new grammar.
Interesting.
Anyways, I am very happy to have, exchanged with you guys and shared and stuff like that. And feel free to visit the site and, enjoy what's there and go to the YouTube channel and just have fun.
Yeah, it was very enlightening. I enjoyed it quite a bit. It'll
Thank
be
you so much for sharing your gift, Serge. Appreciate it.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. I always enjoy it. And well, unfortunately, I can't get enough of it. So it's, when they say, like, find your passion, this is it for me.
Yeah.
great.
Apart
I
from
was
making
thinking,
AI art, I love to do that too.
Oh yeah, but there's quite the cook in front of you here now too, guys. I've experienced some of that physically, quote
oh,
unquote.
really?
Oh yeah.
Wow. And I love to eat. So,
All right.
so
Thank you very much, and thanks for Zilly showing up from Scotland.
Cool. And anytime you want to have a visit, let me know.
Will do. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Good night.
Take care, Serge.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Good night.
great seeing you again, Chuck.
Yeah, you guys too.